Second, as we do. All right, let me make sure everything's set up and going here. I'm just hopping on a few minutes early, 8:28 now, so we'll start in 2 minutes-ish. Uh, let me see. Okay, should be getting there and going and happening. Yeah, there we go. All right. Yeah, so we're just on a few minutes early to give people a chance to pop on. So thank you guys for your patience. Good morning. Let me make sure everything looks decent here. Okay. So I hope everybody's having a good morning so far. We are right in the middle of September. I know what month it is. And we are in the middle of migration, which is very exciting. If you didn't join us last month, or if you missed out on last month, we talked a lot about migration and getting ready for this point in time. So if you're curious about that, I know we did move that over to our YouTube channel, but we're going to be talking about warblers, which are one of the migratory birds that we get during this season, which is very exciting. There's a lot of them and it gets a little crazy, but it's really cool. One other thing I do want to mention is that some of you may be noticing that your bird activity is a little bit slower in your yard this time of year. We are heading, okay, so like we're still in summer, but we're getting closer to fall. And oftentimes during this time of year, there's a lot of natural food out with different types of nuts or seeds or insect activity. So a lot of the birds may slow down at the feeders because natural food is always going to be their primary focus. The bird feeders are just a nice spot of convenience during this time of year. So make sure you're keeping your feeders clean and make sure that you're only doing as much food as you need. Don't overfill them so that you don't have any food going bad or going to waste as things kind of slow down. So keep an eye out for that. But with that, it is 8:30, so we're going to hop right into it. Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining me today. My name is Jolene. I'm a certified songbird feeding specialist with Wild Birds Unlimited of Concord. And while I may be that, I am not an expert on warblers. So that is only why we are doing an introduction to warblers and not a full-out study. So we are going to be doing our best to just kind of get a general idea of warblers if you've never seen any before or don't know too much about them. This, I'm hoping, is a great place to start. So if you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to leave a comment. I'll do my best to answer them as I see them, or if I do not see them during the presentation, I will come back to them later as well too. So with that, I hope you guys are ready because we're just going to jump right into it. So when I say warblers, we're specifically talking about the wood warblers, which are in the family Parulidae, which can be found in North and South America. In the US and Canada, 56 different species can be found. So there's a lot of shuffle back and forth, and we can see quite a variety just where we are depending on the time of year. Wood warblers are different from the Old World warbler family, which can be found in a lot of Europe and other places over there, as wood warblers lack the 10th primary feather, which is one of the flight feathers that can be found on the edge of their wing. They only have 9 versus the 10. And the name warbler can be applied to many different families and many different species of birds. And the same could be said for a lot of the wood warblers we're talking about today. Some of them don't have warbler in their name, some of them do. So definitely knowing ID and shape can be helpful when identifying your warblers. Now, in the wood warbler family, there's again a lot of different species. So there are some that prefer tropical habitats in South America and Central America, while there are others that prefer to shuffle back and forth between more temperate locations like our own, or potentially boreal areas farther north, like in Canada. So it entirely depends on the species. So we can have warblers from tropical forests to marshes, old fields. Many of them are partial to wooded habitats, so it's going to be a little bit more uncommon to see them in more open areas, depending on the time frame and what's going on. And there are also there's also different species in the eastern section of North America, more so than the western section. So one of the most common ones that we'll see in our area, especially even after migration ends, is the yellow-rumped warbler, although they usually look a little bit different compared to their breeding plumage here. So oftentimes yellow-rumped warblers have that yellow rump, and they're a very fun one. A lot of people affectionately call them butterbutts because it does count. So you'll see me kind of reference them a little bit more compared to some other warbler species, just because they can be found in quite a variety of places. So one thing about warblers is that they do a lot of migration. And kind of like I mentioned before, if you hopped on in the beginning, we talked about migration last month and the importance of it, shuffling from breeding habitats to wintering habitats. And in this case, a lot of birds are now switching from their breeding range to their wintering range. For an example of what this might look like, our yellow-rumped warbler that we saw on the other slide, this is an example of their range map. So in the kind of orange-red location that goes all the way up to Alaska and a lot of Canada, that is their summer habitat. That's their breeding range. So this time of year, a lot of them are shuffling down from these northern locations and going down farther south. And this blue area is where they winter for the season. So that's a lot of the southern U.S., Mexico, a lot of Central America, and the Caribbean area as well too. The yellow habitat is actually where you can see them occasionally during their migration, so they're not staying there for too long, but you can spot them in that area. And then the purple is where they can be found year-round. So they have definitely quite a range that they go, and a lot of warblers do. The really cool thing about warblers is because they have such I would say complex, but such interesting migration paths. They have been studied for decades, and we have only continued to improve our accuracy of tracking them with a lot of different updates in technology and radar. So it's really cool to see the exact specifics. And so what we know now is that a lot of warblers often take long flights at night. They are a migratory species that migrate at night. They often rest and refuel during the day, so it's not uncommon to see them at the feeders potentially for maybe a few days at most before they head back out again. And oftentimes they take flight shortly after dusk. These birds also don't take the same path. Goodness, hold on. They usually take a different path in that year. So in the spring, they might take one path, while in the fall, they shift gears and go a slightly different direction. So it's not uncommon for in the spring for them to go over the Gulf, which can take over 12 hours or more. And in the fall, they often may go a slightly different range and maybe stay closer to the coastal areas. So they will shuffle depending on that time frame. Yellow-rumped warblers are actually one of the last ones to leave for migration and also the first ones to arrive. So oftentimes you'll find them leaving in October and then arriving back to their nesting habitat in sometime in April. So they definitely like to take their time when at all possible. And there are some species of warblers that can be found here year-round. So the pine warbler, the common yellowthroat, and the prairie warbler can all be found during different times of year in certain locations in North America as well. When it comes to identification, warblers are not easy, and I am definitely the first one to admit that. There's definitely a few things we can look for, but when we're getting down into like the nitty-gritty of which species we're paying attention to, it can be a little bit tricky. So these birds are often small or medium-sized, so we're thinking a little bit larger than chickadees, closer to kind of sparrow size, maybe a little bit bigger depending on what species, but very close to that kind of range. Oftentimes they have a thinner pointed bill. They can often be confused with vireos or kinglets. Vireos often have a hooked bill at the end, while kinglets are a bit smaller than warblers and do have even thinner bills as well. One thing about warblers too is that they are very active. So you always see them moving. They're always hopping around, jumping from place to place. Kind of very similar to when chickadees are foraging. I often find kind of chickadees, warblers, and kinglets kind of all have that active movement. So that definitely kind of helps narrow it down to know who you're looking at there. Their colors can also vary as well too. They've basically got the whole frame. They've got yellows and olives, blacks, grays, blues, whites, and then brown, orange, or reddish hues depending on the species. And some of these birds are absolutely really cool to look at. And so when you're trying to identify your warblers, there's a few different things people say to pay attention to. First off, and this is just in general for any bird ID, is to pay attention to the size, shape, their habitat, and their behavior. So again, many birds from the same scientific family will have very similar features, such as that thin bill, whether or not they have a longer tail, longer legs, kind of that round shape, or if they're a little bit longer. Habitat can also be a big thing. So if it's in a more open area versus a wooded area, are they found up high in the trees? Do they stay down low or in the mid canopy? And their behaviors, what are they doing? How are they foraging? Where are you finding them at? All of those can kind kind of help you narrow down what species that you are looking for as well. With warblers, it gets a little bit more intense. Oftentimes they say the biggest thing to look for is contrast and color. So do the birds kind of look very simple in coloration, or are they more contrasting? Is it a very bright coloration, which we'll see in like the next slide just to show how that can kind of look in comparison. What body patterns do they have? So wing bars or stripes, if they have eye rings, or basically kind of like that eye line that goes straight through the eye or over the eye. What kind of tail color they have, what's on the belly or right underneath the wing, and then right underneath the tail, oftentimes many warblers can have very distinct colorations as well. So paying attention to all these factors can help narrow down what warbler species you're looking at. In this case, there are some different species do different things, of course. A lot of them are kind of sexually dimorphic, so you can see your differences between like your males and your females. Sometimes it is very subtle. For example, with this pine warbler, we have a male in the top here who has slightly brighter colors, while we have a female in the bottom right who's a little bit more kind of buffed, or like a little bit more dull in like comparison to those brighter colors. Some other warbler species that we do get include the common yellow-throat, who I mentioned can be here year-round, the American redstart, the black-throated blue warbler, and the northern parula, all of which are usually migratory and pass through or can be found in the summertime depending on where they are nesting. So again, these are just some examples of the different types of markings that people will look for when they're trying to identify their warblers. Common yellow-throats obviously do have that nice yellow throat, but so do others. And they do kind of have this kind of mask over their eyes that goes down to their throat as well. Also kind of have those lighter pink legs as well too. The American redstart is very distinct in its coloration, has a lot of contrast from brighter colors to darker colors. You have kind of those neon orange kind of colors right underneath the wing and right at the tip of the wing. You also have a wing bar of that same coloration, and on the outer tail feathers you also have that bright orange color as well. Black-throated blue warblers are also pretty distinctive. Again, similar to the common yellow-throat, they do have that kind of black mask over the eyes, but they do also have the yellow that goes over the throat. Underneath their wings, you have that black stripe, but they do have a white breast. And then, of course, up top, they do have those blue feathers, but what's important to pay attention to is this white, oh my goodness, the white spot that can be found on their wings when at rest too, which makes it also an easier identifier. Northern parulas are very colorful, I say. They have a mix of like a partial eye ring, so you can kind of see that there's the white above and below the eye. They have that yellow throat. Their bill does have two different colors, so sometimes that can be a distinction for certain birds. Two wing bars, kind of that orange rust color underneath the neck, and that yellow that goes down the breast a little bit more as well too. So some of these birds are very distinctive, others are not so much, and you do have some that don't have any difference between your male and your female. So these are all either adults or males, and this is an example of some of the females or the juveniles that you could potentially see during the fall season if there are any like juveniles passing through. So notice immediately with the common yellow throat, we lose that bright black mask. So now we just have the yellow throat itself. There is like some kind of buffy coloration around the eye, which can kind of help be a signifier as well. The American redstart is no longer that very contrasting color of like that black and that orange. Now she's got more of that kind of gray olive green color, but you can still pay attention to the yellow that can be found at the kind of at the shoulder area, the wing bar, and at the edges of the tail feathers. The black-throated blue warbler is also very subtle, but again, we have that white spot on the wing that could be found on the male as well. So subtle things can be very helpful descriptors. And again, they don't have that black mask, but she's got a nice little light eyebrow and a stripe going down the throat as well too. So again, these can be very subtle. And with the northern parula, both the males and the females look similar. So the juveniles are the ones that are a slightly different coloration. In the fall season, it gets a little tricky for identification because that is when we have a lot of the juveniles passing through, and they often have different colorations and patterns compared to the adults as well. So you can see how much more subtle, but you've still got the two wing bars going on here as well too. And some other things there as well. When it comes to the diet for a lot of warblers, these birds are insectivores, so they eat a lot of insects such as moths, caterpillars, and like a lot of different arthropods and things like that as well. They have that kind of thinner bill that is very helpful for catching a lot of different insects. They do glean from like twigs, leaves, buds, and catkins, and we'll go into like different types of specialists in a second as well too. Fruit can be a very important part of their winter diet. Yellow-rumped warblers, like I mentioned, we saw that they have that very large range throughout North America, and that's oftentimes they have a larger wintering range because they can eat a lot of bayberries in the winter, which not a lot of other warblers may do. So that allows them to winter farther north than any other species. Pine warblers, on the other hand, again, both of these we get in the wintertime or year-round, eat a significant amount of pine nuts, which is really cool as well. So just to show some fun videos here as well too, this is a video of a pine warbler. We do get them in the in year-round, and I often see them a little bit more during the winter time. So they do definitely expand that range then when they're looking for more food and resources. This is an example of how they potentially dispatch their prey and various caterpillars. You can see here that there's a lot of movement. Regardless of whether they're stationary or constantly moving around, they are usually very busy birds. Pine warblers also do have a very distinctive song. I think they sound like a little bit of a laser gun, which is really cool, but they definitely kind of have a sci-fi sound to them, and are very distinctive compared to some other birds. Here we also have one of the yellow-rumped warblers. Again, they don't have the very distinctive black and gray plumage, but you do see the yellow underneath the wing. And later on in the video, you could see the splash of yellow on the rump as well too. So, like I said earlier, because it's fun, yellow-rumped warblers, again, have that larger range, so you can see them in quite a variety of areas. But I affectionately call them butterbutts. I think it's cute. They're very cute birds. And I love warblers as much as they stress me out with all of the different strategies for identification. So they're super cool just in general. All right. And then we said most of these birds are insect eaters, and they all can have different strategies depending on where they are. If they're in more marshy areas, they can take advantage of different types of insects or invertebrates that are on the top of the water as well. So this is a prothonotary warbler, which again can be found during a migrational time of year as well. So you can see they have that bright coloration and that darker bill too, which is really cool. And these birds are also, because they're smaller and they just kind of have those like thinner legs, they're also very good clinging birds. So they are able to move in a variety of areas that many larger birds cannot, which is fun. Something that is really cool as well about their diet is that over the years, a lot of studies have gone into warblers, right? Robert MacArthur did a lot of studies in wood warblers in the New England area from the 1950s and the 1970s. And he found that lots of different species of warblers were able to share the same habitat while reducing competition over resources. Now, oftentimes, for example, let's look at our hummingbirds, right? We only have one species of hummingbird in the eastern section of of North America. So in the east side of the Mississippi, we only primarily get one species. These birds can be super competitive against each other because they know that they're all fighting for the same resources, whether that's food, nesting habitats, or potential mates. They can be very sassy about it and very territorial. Meanwhile, if you have different species in the same area, sometimes they start to notice that they're not as competitive against those particular species. But because warblers are all insect eaters and they're all sharing very similar spaces, it's kind of conflicting because you would think they would all eat through those resources super quick and wouldn't be able to have anything to sustain them through that season. But what he found was that the birds were basically doing something called niche partitioning, where each species utilized different portions of the same trees. So even though they were using the exact same resources, they were able to forage in different levels. So for example, in areas where black-throated green warblers, yellow-rumped warblers, and northern parullas were found, black-throated green warblers were found to forage at like mid-levels of a canopy, while yellow-rumped warblers foraged higher up. And when the black-throated greens were not there, the yellow-rumped warblers were like, oh, well, that's some free real estate. I'm just going to come down over here and take some of that as well. So they would shift depending on who was there. Northern parulas would move to the outer branches of trees. So while the other two were focusing on like the top and the center, they focused on the outer parts in the mid and upper canopy. And again, when those other two weren't there, the northern parulas basically kind of moved in on that territory and used those areas. So basically, it was just kind of a mutual agreement where they all kind of stayed out of each other's way while they were all utilizing very similar resources. So it was very cool to notice that. And he did multiple studies, I believe, on this. So you saw the way different species interacted with each other as well, which is very cool. We also have different types of foraging specialists. So some warblers focus on, again, certain areas or certain types of foods as well. So worm-eating warblers obviously focus on caterpillars and other things, but they often probe clusters of dead leaves, and that's their focus. The water thrush and Swainson's warblers often forage through grounded leaves and branches, and the water thrush, and again with the name, will occasionally kind of forage in marshy habitat and occasionally take fish, smaller fish and stuff like that as well, which is really cool. Like I said earlier, warblers have many different names and not all of them have warbler in their name. So you definitely have to pay attention to the shape and size of the bird first before assuming whether or not it is one or the other. So some distinctive things about the northern water thrush is that it does have the eyebrow above its eye. It has streaking on its breast. And one thing that's also pretty interesting is that the tail kind of constantly bobs while it's in movement as well. There is a northern water thrush and a Louisiana water thrush, both of which have slightly different ranges, and the coloration between them is very subtle. So paying attention to those can be very helpful as well when figuring out who's who, essentially. And again, you have different birds that forage in different areas. So black and white warblers are very distinctive. They have a lot of contrast in their coloration with that black and white feather pattern. They also have a tendency to go along the trunks of larger branches rather than the outer portions of leaves or trees. They're checking the crevices for any types of food or resources. You can see that they move super quickly in comparison to other species. And when you compare them to nuthatches or woodpeckers, I'm going to play that one more time, who will travel the trunks of trees, and woodpeckers stay vertical, right? So they kind of go down with their head facing upwards, while nuthatches can go every which way on a tree. You'll find that those two remain pretty close to the center of the tree, while warblers kind of have a tendency to hop more so from place to place rather than kind of walk or have look more like a crawl as well. So their movement behaviors are also distinctive compared to other species. You also have subtle bill variations depending on species. So redstarts and Wilson warblers have broader bills in comparison to other species. And then they also have these nice rictal bristles, which basically look like whiskers on a bird, but they're just very fine feathers that allow them to be more effective at aerial fly catching, because those bristles can kind of detect when prey is nearby and they know when to snap their bill shut. Yellow-throated warblers often have a longer bill for probing crevices of trunks, branches, and pine cones as well. The yellow-throated warblers also have a yellow throat like the common yellow throat. They have a different style mask and different style coloration right underneath the wings and on the back as well too. So these are also very important factors to consider when you're comparing your different warblers. When it comes to nesting, oftentimes the males arrive a week before the females. So those are always the ones you'll see probably first. And in most cases, the males are the only ones that really sing. You might have females that have a shorter song, but for the most case, that is all the males. You can also determine not always, and this is again for like super advanced ornithologists, but I came across this while I was doing research, is that depending on where certain species usually forage in like the canopies, whether it's like in the upper levels or the mid levels or lower levels, their songs can have a different type of cadence or tune. So like it's more of a buzzing sound versus a whistling sound, which I found to be pretty interesting as well, because if you're that good, you can know where to look if you're hearing certain birds as well. Oftentimes when these birds start nesting, they'll do an open cup nest that often have a lot of plant fibers, leaves, and bark strips. Depending on the species, you have some that will make cup nests in the trees, some that are cavity nesters, and a lot that can be ground nesters. On the right side is an ovenbird, so again, no warbler in the name, but they still have like the same shape and are in the same family, where you have a domed nest, which is really cool. So they've made a lower structure, and then they've also covered the top of it, so it's very inconspicuous as well, if predators are trying to find it or anything like that too. This is a video of a chestnut-sided warbler, and I could not help myself, making a nest in one of the trees. So again, they make that cup-style nest. You can see a lot of the different fibers and stuff that they use, and it is just trying to get everything just right, which is also just very fun. So, yeah, no, nothing to say. I thought this was cute. Chestnut-sided warblers also have very distinctive colorations as well. I kind of put them in the same group as like the black-throated greens and the black-throated blues, where they have kind of those distinctive chestnut sides right underneath the wings. And they all kind of have similar features in that sense, but obviously very different colorations. So that is very interesting as well. When it comes to nesting, these birds often have anywhere from 4 to 5 eggs, and they often, it takes, obviously lay an egg a day, takes about 4-5 weeks total before all of their young are ready to fledge for the season. They often split the brood work between the male and the female, so each one kind of takes a few young and they kind of split it up to make it easier for themselves. And like I mentioned before, you have a lot of species that come up to like North America to nest up here, while you have others that stay in more tropical areas. And you can have a very similar species, or same species depending on, that oftentimes, depending on where they nest, they adjust their strategy for raising their young a little bit too. So temperate species, so those that nest kind of in our range, often feed their young up to a month after fledging, and then they're all kind of good to go and do their own thing before migrating out. While tropical young will stay with their parents in the family until the next season entirely. So they will stay a lot longer with their parents in order to make sure that they have the right skills before separating entirely. Like I mentioned before, juveniles often have immature plumage until their first breeding season. So they might have a partial molt in that kind of first fall, where they have some different body feathers, but their tail feathers and their flight feathers can often still have a lot of that immature plumage. So for those that are very good at what they do and are able to do a lot of like bird banding, stuff like that, they can identify juveniles from the adults or females depending on the condition of the tail and the tail feathers, which is really cool. Something else that I wanted to mention really quick is because there are many different species of warblers, and because they can sometimes be habitat specialists or focused on different areas, there have been some conservation efforts for different types of species. So two kind of successful strategies that have gone really well include the Kirtland's warbler, who preferred young stands of jack pines in like Michigan area, and basically they preferred a lot of that low growth rather than kind of overgrown areas in these pines, where at a time, a lot of land managers suppressed forest fires and eliminated that habitat because they let stuff kind of continue to grow. This also, a mix of that also allowed cowbirds to like spread into that warbler's range, so it was dealing with a loss of nesting habitat as well as cowbird parasitism as well. So their populations were starting to dwindle to the point where they had 167 pairs counted in 1974. After a while, they did start to control the cowbird populations in certain areas, and they also liberalized fire policies, so they did have controlled burnings to help increase pair population. And in the later 1990s, a lot of the population had grown from 167 pairs to 700. So that was a very successful effort on their end as well too. The golden-cheeked warbler, which can only be found in like the U.S. in Texas, winters in Central America and comes back and forth with migration. They often prefer older stands of juniper and oak woodlands, but oftentimes these habitats were being cut down to clear for housing and infrastructure. In order to kind of salvage some of the habitat for the golden-cheeked warbler, the National Wildlife Refuge was made specifically to protect the warbler's habitat, which of course came with some goodness, came with some contention because, of course, you have those that are trying to develop versus kind of stabilize this habitat as well. So it's one of those things where with a lot of different warbler species, it can be a very delicate balance as well, too, in making sure we're still being mindful of their habitat. And issues such as habitat fragmentation, where a larger habitat is split, whether it's by a road or a city, and it changes the entire structure of the habitat itself. Invasive plants, growing populations of like browsers, which again adjust an entire ecosystem, or a rise in feral predators such as feral cats, can cause a lot of issues with our warbler populations, many songbird populations, and when the songbirds are affected, many other species such as different amphibians, reptiles, mammals can also be affected by these things as well. So just like one of those things of like the more you know in these kinds of aspects, and being mindful of like native plants and other things like that too. In regards to how to attract warblers to your yard, a lot of it is just going to be a mix of migration, kind of bringing them through, and seeing who you get in the winter season. For the Piedmont and coastal areas, we're going to have a lot of different migratory visitors, and oftentimes we have higher winter populations that are more consistent in neighborhoods, and they kind of expand their range in the winter as they look for food. So while we do have quite a variety that can be found in the summer, when it comes to our backyard, certain specific ones can be found more frequently in like the winter, right? In North Carolina, the mountains, you can often find breeding populations pretty heavily in the summer there too, because they have those higher altitudes and kind of cooler temperatures as well. So it depends entirely on where you're going. But if we're hoping to get some in our yard, the winter populations are a little bit easier as well. Oftentimes, the best way to attract warblers is by remembering their diet, which they enjoy a lot of insects in their diet, and the fact that these birds are small, clinging birds, so they are able to adapt pretty well to a variety of different style feeders. So in this case, mealworms are probably one of the better options used to attract warblers to your yard. Dried or live mealworms do completely fine. Dried mealworms are easier to store in a resealable bag, and they're easy to pour out whatever you need it. Live mealworms are they require a little bit more care. They do go in the fridge to kind of help them hibernate so they're not as active. You can always feed them like a baby carrot every now and then in order to make sure that they're still doing well, and just to put a few of those out at a time if you'd like. And suets, which are rendered beef fat mixed in with a variety of other ingredients such as mealworms, fruit, peanuts, tree nuts, all that kind of stuff. And suet comes in a variety of forms, from cakes, cylinders, plugs, different types of suet balls. So there's different strategies to feed them as well. All of those are fine because warblers are very good clinging birds. Bark butter, which is a Wild Birds Unlimited product, is a spreadable type of suet. So if you don't really want to use a feeder, but you want to try a suet product and you have some good trees in the area, you can spread that on the trunk of a tree to kind of attract their attention there. There's also bark butter bits, which are a type of suet nugget, as well as a variety of mixtures that are a mix of both bark butter bits and like mealworms and things like that as well too. So feel free to give any of those a shot, and just pay attention in your yard this time of year. You never know who's going to pass by or pass through. If you don't have Merlin ID handy on you, I would recommend downloading that app because it can be very handy and helpful, especially with this time of year when we don't know who's going to be coming through our yards as well. That being said, that's pretty much all I have to say about the warblers today. A lot of the resources in regards to photos and videos came from the Macaulay Library at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. For those that are looking to find more information about specific birds in general, you can always check out All About Birds as well. Oh my gosh. allaboutbirds.org is also a great, easy resource to read. For those that are really intense about the warblers and want to know more about them, there is a Warbler Guide by Tom Stevenson and Scott Whittle that has a lot of good information. I'd highly recommend it if you are super serious about your warblers. And of course, checking with Cornell Lab of Ornithology, as they have many different resources that you can utilize as well. For anybody that's coming in the store today, if you mention the coupon code Warbler at the counter, we can give you $5 off a $25 purchase or more. Only available today, either in store or through a phone order as well. And we'll be having a second viewing of this presentation at 11, in case you know anybody that'll be in the area and wants to stop in. But once again, thank you guys so much for listening. We'll be posting these this and any past presentations to our YouTube channel, Wild Birds Unlimited of Concord NC, in case you do want to check any of that out later on, or if you missed one today or know somebody who missed one today, if you guys are that curious. But with that being said, thank you guys very much. I hope you guys have a very fun migration season bird watching, and I will see you guys next month.